afternoon, everyone. This is the Board Executive Committee meeting of the East Bay Regional Park District. It's Thursday, September 3rd, 2020, and we are starting just a little bit late at 12:34. And I would like to ask our recording secretary, Becky Fang, to go ahead and call the roll.
Okay, Director Corbett,
Here.
Director Rosario,
Here.
Director Reeskamp.
Here.
Okay, and I will just list off the names of staff that's participating in today's meeting. We have Robert Doyle, Dr. Ana Alvarez, Brian Holt, Devin Reef, Edward Willis, Kip Walsh, Carol Victor, Christina Couchner, Deborah Ocker, Jim O'Connor, Eric Fueller, Chief Anthony Chipperl, and Yolanda Barrio-Knight.
Well, thank you very much. Thank you to everyone who is joining us today. We appreciate your presence. We're holding today's committee meeting in accordance with Governor Newsom's executive order, allowing for board members to participate in standing committees remotely. And we are providing live audio and video streaming. Members of the public can provide public comments in 3 ways, either via live Zoom, as we have some of you with us today, submitting an email, we've received emails too, or by leaving a voicemail as noted on the agenda, where the voicemail will be transcribed and made available to us. The information can always be found on our agendas, and they are always posted on our district's website at ebparks.org. Do any members of the committee have any questions before we go ahead to the first agenda item?
No.
Everybody good? Okay, very good. All right, today we have a very important agenda item, where we will be discussing naming of the Concord Hills Regional Park. Concord Hills is not the official name at this point, but that is what we have been calling it for the last few years. And so today we will hear from staff and the wonderful work they've been doing. Good afternoon. Brian, I think you might be first.
Thank you, President Corbett. Yeah, I'm going to introduce this item. So thank you, President Corbett and members of the Executive Committee. My name is Brian Holt, Chief of Planning, Trails, and GIS at the East Bay Regional Park District. And it is an honor to introduce this important item today. Naming a new park of this size and significance is never easy, but some of the most important work we do. At first, I just want to acknowledge everyone who's engaged in this conversation today regarding the name of the future regional park at the former Concord Naval Weapons Station. Thank you to everyone who's offered their suggestions, participated in surveys, engaged in meetings, and all those who are joining us today. The Park District began planning for a new regional park on the former Concord Naval Weapons Station over 20 years ago. In July of last year, we were proud to accept possession of the first phase, totaling over 2,300 acres. And in July of this year, we were able to adopt a land use plan for the full 2,500 acre regional park. We're pleased to be here today in the first public hearing on a name for the future regional park. Park District staff has engaged the public over a potential name for this future park throughout the land use plan process. It's gone on for over 5 years. And as you'll hear, staff solicited suggestions throughout public meetings, conducted surveys through the East Bay Regional Park District social media channels, as well as through the City of Pittsburgh, City of Concord, and Save Mount Diablo. We received a robust response, including a large interest in recognizing Native peoples through this property. The Park Advisory Committee and the Executive Committee directed staff to initiate discussions with local tribal leaders to consider a culturally affiliated name. And I want to extend my gratitude to the tribal leaders who gave generously of their time and shared their stories regarding this land. Of course, the history of Port Chicago is also an important history at this site. And we've enjoyed working closely with the National Park Service and the Friends of Port Chicago throughout the land use plan process. Our country is in unprecedented times in the wake of the shooting of Jacob Blake and the deaths of George Floyd, Breonna Taylor, and too many more Black lives that have been lost since this process began. Our country is very much engaged in a conversation about our history and recognizing the important events like the Port Chicago explosion and its aftermath that have been pushed aside for too long. This is a land of many stories and many histories, and interpretation at this new park will be based on broad themes that encompass many periods and communities, designed to build on each other so that they will provide visitors experience that educate and inspire. We envision one of the major organizing through lines is the ongoing patterns of stewardship and occupation of the land. From the first inhabitants, the Chucon people, to Spanish explorers, Mexican ranchos, early American settlers, ranchers, and farmers, and to the US military's use of the land as the Concord Naval Weapons Station. And finally, now to our era when the land is dedicated to public use and benefit. Taking both the bitter and the sweet from our past means we won't shy away from the oppression and pain experienced here, especially those of Black and Indigenous people. Interpretation will also convey the resilience of both communities, as we can interpret Native people's commitment to cultural continuity and the fight that African-American sailors and civil rights figures like Thurgood Marshall waged to right wrongs after the Port Chicago explosion. In fact, resilience can be another major theme as we interpret how the land has been re-envisioned over time. Resilience can capture the strength and capacity of the land and people to recover from experience and to reinvent their relationships to this place and to each other. So this is an important decision and an opportunity for the Park District. And we're so pleased to see that so many see their history in this future park. And we're honored to work to give life to this history. So with that, I'm going to hand it over to Devin Reef, Principal Planner, to provide the presentation on the meeting.
Thank you very much, Brian, and welcome, Devin.
Thank you. Thank you. We're going to have Planner Eddie Willis share his screen, and he's going to advance the slideshow today.
Thank you, Eddie.
And while he's doing that, I can get started to say good afternoon, everyone, to the public and to the board. I'm Devin Reef, Principal Planner with the Park District. Pleased to bring you a report and recommendation for the new regional park in Concord. For people listening at home, the Park District Board adopted the Concord Hills Land Use Plan and certified the environmental review document in July 7th, 2020, with the understanding that a separate process would select the name for the park. And as Director Corbett had mentioned, Concord Hills Regional Park has been the working name for many years, but that is not the official name of the park. Ultimately, it is the Park District Board of Directors that selects the park name at a public hearing, and that public hearing is currently selected for mid-October. Today's meeting is the first of 3 public meetings to suggest the park name. Staff was last before this board executive committee in May and also in August of this year, and heard the direction to consult with tribal entities in the 2 counties and to return with a naming recommendation, which is what today's meeting is about. Slide 1, please. Just to remind everyone who's not necessarily familiar, this is, as Brian mentioned, about 2,300 acres in the city of Concord, a portion of the former Concord Naval Weapons Station. It's at the boundary of Concord and the city of Pittsburgh, with views to the Delta and to the mountain. Next. The Park District naming process allows for regional parks, trails, features, areas, and facilities to be named after natural features or geographic features, topographic or paleontological features, or cultural features such as archaeological and historic artifacts, historic persons, families, or events. Existing historically related names shall be respected. Next. Here's a graphic of the park naming process. Today, first, names get suggested from many sources, and as Brian mentioned, we've been hearing for several years from different communities about suggested names, but the adoption process happens here at the Board Executive Committee, followed by a meeting of the Park Advisory Committee, which is currently scheduled for September 28th. If they approve of the naming recommendation that comes out of this committee, they will deliberate and recommend a name to the full board, which is currently scheduled for mid-October. If the Park Advisory Committee disagrees with today's recommendation, then we would hear from them and we would start the process back here at the Board Executive Committee. Next. So one question has come up. Where does the suggested park names come from. And the Park District, as Brian mentioned, has had many different sources. We've really been honored by all of the suggestions. There have been probably 10 community meetings over the last 5 years that the Park District has either hosted or participated in. We had an event at the site, which is a picture shown here, in October. We had about 100 folks there, and here's one of the tables that people could stop at and do a voting selection for names. Then, as Brian mentioned, we had 4 online surveys, which we had a really robust participation in. We had about 1,200 suggestions. These were surveys offered in February and March of this year. City of Concord, City of Pittsburgh, Save Mount Diablo, and the Park District each held the same survey. Then we packaged that up and brought it to the executive committee, as I mentioned in May, and they gave some direction to staff. And most recently, the interest has continued just in the last 2 weeks. There's been a change.org survey by a group called the Citizens for Historical Equity, who is recommending and gathering signatures for the name Thurgood Marshall Regional Park. Next. So as Director Corbett mentioned, Concord Hills Regional Park has been sort of the placeholder name. There has been a lot of public interest in a name which recognizes Native heritage and culture. So the Park District consulted with Native American tribal leaders with ancestral ties to the area, which I'll discuss now. Next. As Brian mentioned, we see this as staff as a land with many stories. And we know the interpretive themes of stewardship and occupation, war and peace, resistance and resilience will be a major part of all the Park District's interpretive features. There will be a new visitor center, which will tell the history of Port Chicago, the events, the explosion, the men who were involved, the men who lost their lives and who were wounded, the stories of the Naval Weapons Station itself, the ranching history, and the Native history here. In partnership with the National Park Service, we're going to tell the stories of the sailors at Port Chicago and the resistance of the Port Chicago 50, who ultimately changed civil rights in America. Next. And here's a reminder of those young men 75 years ago, some of whom lost their lives, some of whom who were wounded. And it's the story of the Port Chicago 50, which will be the story of resilience and resistance that will be told at this park. Next. So the Native history here goes back millennia. The language that the people of this area spoke, the area around the mountain, is the language Bay Miwok. There are neighboring languages in the Ohlone dialect, Chochenyo being a major one. And so we spoke with tribal leaders who have ancestors who speak both Bay Miwok and Chochenyo during our Native consultation. Next. In terms of the tribal configuration and tribal heritage here, the Chupkan people were the people who lived in the area north of the mountain between what we now know of as Concord and the foothills. Next. So as directed by the Board Executive Committee, staff engaged with Dr. Beverly Ortiz in an official consultation on park naming with these tribes. And I'd like to just speak the tribal names because we, as Brian mentioned, appreciate all of the time and consideration they gave us. The Association of Remuntush Ohlone, California Indian Water Commission, the Confederated Villages of Lejeune, the Costanoan Rumsen Carmel Tribe, the Himran of Ohlone, Bay Miwok and Plain Miwok, the Indian Canyon Mutsun Band of Costanoan People, the Ione Band of Miwok Indians, the Ohlone Indian Tribe, the Muwekma Ohlone Tribe, and the Wilton Rancheria, some of whom representatives are on the meeting today. Next. So in the end, the consensus was split between the representatives of these groups. Chupkan territory emerged as everyone's either top choice or top second choice. Spelled phonetically, it would be Cupkan territory. And the Chupkan people, again, lived in the valleys north of the mountain and spoke the Miwok language. The Chupkan and their ancestors were stewards of this land for millennia, and their descendants continue to live here today. Next. But there was also strong interest from the tribal leaders in using the native language to express the place. And a phrase, place of our grandchildren's future, emerged as one that everyone could agree, or most people could agree, represented the historic continuity of the ancestors and the children to come of all people. And that translates in Plains Miwok as Chakchao Aniksan Regional Park. Thank you. Next. So Concord Hills Regional Park is still in the running. It was the preference of the city council at City of Concord, took a resolution and chose this name. From staff's perspective, it has been a placeholder this whole time, and it doesn't reflect those multiple histories that we were referring to earlier. And it's also not a geographic place name. It's a name made up for this purpose. Next. There were other names top voted from the online surveys. 2 were named for the Mexican land grants for the area, Los Medanos Regional Park and Monte del Diablo Regional Park. These are ranchos that were in lands that we now know as Pittsburgh, Bay Point, and the city of Concord. Next. So in the end, the staff recommendation is with the Native American recommendation for Chupkan Territory Regional Park or Chupkan Regional Park. This provides us an opportunity to present an interpretive history that is inclusive of all peoples and all stories. Next. A reminder that there are many other park features to be named here. This is a map of the future park from the land use plan. There are trails, natural areas and campsites, an event center, and probably most importantly, the visitor center. This is the joint partnership with the National Park Service to tell the story of the Port Chicago events, the Port Chicago 50, and the changes in the civil rights heritage of America, as well as the Diablo Valley history, the history of the ranching communities, and the history of the Naval Weapons Station itself. Next. So to remind everyone, there are two additional meetings besides this one. The Park Advisory Committee is scheduled to meet and take this up on September 28th, and the Board of Directors tentatively scheduled for October 20th. Next. And with that, I will conclude and thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much, Devin. We definitely appreciate the time and work that has gone into putting together these thoughts for us. And also, as Brian and you have mentioned, we appreciate the time and investment of all people who were involved in the in our comment period and the time that our Indigenous peoples and ancestral leaders spent with you as well. So we very much appreciate that deep dive for the information. And I think our goal always is a park district is to be inclusive and to hear from as many people as we can and take into consideration all of the views represented throughout our district. And also, of course, respect the history of our lands. And this is the first time we have taken a path to spend time with the Indigenous peoples who occupied lands where our parks are now. And I think that should be recognized. That is a very important part and a new step that the district has moved forward in such a meaningful way. But on that very same note, the next part of today's meeting will be our public comments. And I know that we have received letters, emails, and we have members of the public waiting to speak. and we are very eager and interested in hearing additional input today from our community on the future determination and naming of these beautiful lands. So with that, I will ask the committee secretary to open up the public comments and please introduce our visitors.
Okay, thank you, President Corbett.
Oh, yeah.
As you noted,
I did want to say one more thing. Normally, we take 3 minutes for our comment period for comments, but this is an extremely important discussion today, and we want to make sure everybody has an opportunity to give us their thoughts. So we're going to suspend the 3-minute limit on comments. We will ask people to try to be brief because we want to make sure we hear from everybody today, but we want people to have the time that they need to give us their thoughts. So pardon that interruption.
okay, thank you, President Corbett. As you mentioned, we have a number of people who are here who would like to make a live public comment. So what I will do is call the individual's name, and if you can unmute yourself and turn on your camera, or maybe not if you prefer not to turn your camera. And after you're done, if you can mute yourself. So the first public comment is from, I have Don Hankins. Don, are you there?
Do we have?
Sorry, yeah, I'm using a phone. Sorry, can you hear me now?
Yes.
Yes, Mr. Hankins, please go ahead.
Yep, sorry, I'm on a really unstable phone line and internet connection, so I'll keep the photo there static. But I appreciate the opportunity to participate in this, and that the working with the staff as an Indigenous community member, as a Miwok person. This is a really a big shift, I think, from the park, and I really appreciate that. In terms of the names that are suggested, I think, you know, what really makes a lot of sense to me around this is to recognize place. And when we consider the landscape and our culture as Indigenous people, our language and our culture is something that's derived from the landscape. And when I think about like the name Chupkan territory, to me that's reflective of the people, but it's kind of static in time. And what I mean by that is that as we think about historic context of things in a native village setting, every few generations, those villages might move to a different location and might have a different name that's associated with it. And so I just give a little context to that from a cultural perspective. To me, what really resonates as opportunities around this, and Brian and Devin had shared this information, is the idea of recognizing the landscape and the opportunities either through sacred geography or names that we might use to reflect the connection of people within the landscape. And so when we think about our particular name in Bay Miwok and Plains Miwok for Mount Diablo, for instance, which this is part of Mount Diablo, we have terms like Wawonia, which refers to that particular place. And, having a name that's reflective of that is something that I know a lot of tribal folks had expressed in this process. But at the same time, I think about the shared histories that are there from the past, from pre-contact time period to contact time period, and looking at the current situation that we're in, and I appreciate what was shared about that thought, is what our future is together. And one of the concepts that's really important in understanding that from a Native perspective is that our ancestors were always accepting of other people coming in, provided that we could all live and work together in this landscape. And I think we're at a time where we're finally starting to see that come to fruition. And one of our obligations that we carry as cultural bearers is a responsibility to future generations, and that's been passed down generation after generation from ancestral times. And so when we had one of our meetings, the name of thinking about a place that is respecting that future generation, that word of that came about. And so as Devin had shared, this name, Chatra Aniksan, represents this place that is recognizing an obligation to our future generations of all of us coming together in a form, in a name that's really about reconciliation and all of us moving together. And it's not denying the past. It's not, going over any of the historical aspects, but really looking to the future as an opportunity and what reminders we have from this landscape to be able to think about that. So I just wanted to share that concept, and I'll leave that open to questions if anybody has any.
Thank you very much for your comments. During public comments, we do not typically ask questions, but we leave the entire time period open for you to share with us your thoughts. So thank you very much. And Becky, you can go ahead and
One last thing is that as a speaker, if there's any confusion over pronunciations and so forth, I can help with that, and that's what I'm leaving open to you guys. So thank you.
Great. Thank you very much. We really appreciate you being a resource for that. Thank you so much.
Hey,
We appreciate
our next speaker is Tom Leatherman.
I think you're muted.
Sorry about that. I'm trying to get all the pieces together. Just thank you to the executive committee and the board and all the work by the East Bay Regional Parks. It's clear that you guys have done a lot of discussion about this, and we've certainly been involved as time has gone on. I wanted to join today just to express some concerns that have been raised by a number of the groups that we work with, and in particular around the history of Port Chicago, and the place that we're going to be telling this story. And I know that the Park District is dedicated to working with us on this visitor center. And we are eager to begin that planning process, but we are also concerned that the story of Port Chicago being told at the visitor center sort of isn't left behind in terms of the names. And I think as part of the national dialogue that's been going on, names are an important thing. And I think the names that we use to describe the places, I think it's even written into your policy. It gives people a sense of what they're going to see or hear or learn when they go somewhere. So although I think that the naming of the whole regional park doesn't necessarily need to include the name of Port Chicago, I think that somehow in the naming as you move forward, and I know some of the naming processes have been decoupled in some level because the site level naming is gonna happen in a future process. I think that as you're working through this process and coming up with the name, I guess I would encourage you to think about the names that are going to be coming for some of the major features, such as the visitor center, as you're doing this naming process, because I do think they are connected, and I do think they will translate into expectations or at least concerns about how the stories that we're telling are shared and how we move forward in jointly making sure that the story and the history of Port Chicago isn't forgotten. So I know these decisions aren't easy decisions for you all. The one thing I guess I also would put out there is that I know that as we move forward and as we begin, I think you referred to yourselves as not necessarily engaging in the past with the Native people about the naming of your parks. And I think that one thing that's come through my mind that I wanted to share is that, there's a whole bunch of regional parks that you manage. And this new regional park obviously is a new opportunity, but I guess I would throw out there that I think you actually have another opportunity to work with the Native community to look at your regional parks and see if there's possibly an opportunity to rename one of your other parks to be more representative possibly of a site that might have more meaning within the Native culture to something that's, again, not knowing the connections with this land and knowing that there are regional parks spread across the landscape, that there may be another place that is worth looking at for naming or renaming related to the Native people that were here. And And in thinking about that, I guess, the site that we're going to be telling the story of Port Chicago, I mean, this is the only site within the regional park where that story is going to be told. And so I would encourage you to sort of look at that and think about that sort of broader. I know we're talking about the naming of this one regional park, but I think the park district has an opportunity to sort of look at this more holistically as you engage with the tribes and see if there's an opportunity for working with the tribes moving forward in other ways as well. So those are my thoughts, and thanks for the time.
Thank you very much for your comments. And I do want to take a moment just to clarify something. My comments earlier were with reference to having a deeper and longer process in engagement with Indigenous peoples in the naming of this park. We have engaged in the past, and we have named some of our lands and parks and park features to honor the history of Indigenous peoples. This is the first time we've had such a deep dive in discussion, but that is not a part of history that we have ignored or forgotten, but it is something that, we can always continue to improve upon. But I want to make that clear. That's not something that we have left out in our interpretation of our parks in any way. So I did want to just clarify that, but thank you for your comments. All right, next person.
Speaker is Diana McDaniel.
Yes, good afternoon.
Good afternoon. I'm trying to,
We hear you, but we don't see you.
it says I cannot do it because the host has turned me off. So I don't know.
There you
Oh,
are.
there I am.
There you are. We see you now.
Okay. All right, thank you. Thanks for this opportunity to speak. I'm representing the Friends of the Port Chicago National Memorial. We're a California public benefit corporation and a 501c3 nonprofit. We are official partners with the National Park Service, and we have been working collaboratively with the East Bay Regional Park District. We've been working for the same end for this park to come into being and for there to be a world-class visitor center. And my concern that I have voiced to Tom and Brian, and historically we have been like a public voice, but my concern has been that the Port Chicago story will be lost. And with the naming of the park, with the suggested name, I've been torn because I feel like it's the horrendous treatment and the almost annihilation of Indigenous peoples that I've just felt torn. I felt almost pitted, one minority against another, to have one name versus another, because of course my thought was for it to be Port Chicago Memorial Regional Park. So, but I am, so with that concern and with the torn feelings, I began to think about it, and at first was very much in agreement with the name, the Yukon Territory Regional Park. And then as I thought about it more, I thought this particular property has a significant historical significance to African American history. Whereas there are many parks and the whole nation, our whole country was occupied by the Indigenous people. So I was thinking also, as Tom just mentioned, that I'm thinking that possibly other properties, other parks could have more Indigenous names. So for me, it's sort of like I hate to say this, but it's like a Black Lives Don't Matter story, that there currently no regional parks named for or about African Americans in Contra Costa County. And the whole Port Chicago story, including the war effort, the explosion, the discrimination, the city of Port Chicago being raised, the largest mutiny trial, the what Devin mentioned, it's a significant part of this land's use. And I heard that there might be an idea of conflict with the names Port Chicago Naval Magazine National Memorial and Port Chicago Memorial on two different sides of the naval base. But actually, I don't see any conflict. I believe the two enhance each other. They amplify the importance of the historic significance and the role the disaster played in the local and national history. So today, with respect to the naming of the park, I would recommend naming it Port Chicago Regional Park. The land itself was part of the military facility and the conversion from a military base to a park to enjoy during peacetime. I think that's significant. It's a difficult visitor center to be housed on this property, and the visitor center has not been named. So my thinking was that I'd love the request that either the whole regional park be named after Port Chicago or to name the visitor center after Port Chicago Memorial Visitors and Interpretive Center. My concern is that the Native American name will overshadow the Port Chicago story, or possibly to name it Port Chicago Chukon Regional Park. But I am grateful to have the opportunity to share and have this feeling that I don't want the story to be pushed aside or overshadowed. This is the only place that has this significant African American history in the county, I believe. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your comments. Thank you.
Our next public speaker is Lewis Thrower.
Hello, it says my camera is not coming on. Can that start video? Okay, there we go. All
There you
right,
are.
thank you, thank you all. And I want to say thank you also for extending the time on such a very important issue right now that we have this dialogue open, because this is a very critical time that I feel like we all are aware of in our American story that's all unfolding right now. So I want to say thank you for giving extra time for this very important dialogue.
You're
And
welcome.
so thank you. So first I want to say good afternoon. My name is Lewis Thrower, and I'm representing the historical equity. And I'm here to talk about the underrepresentation of people of color in East Bay Regional Park names. I like to discuss why I support naming a park after the Chukon peoples, and I believe there are parks in the region that would equally be suited to tell their story. As an African-American hiker and enthusiastic supporter of the Park District, I was expecting Concord Hills to be turned into a place where I would feel at home. We all know that Black history at Port Chicago, and the Park District is filled with good-intentioned people. So surely the name on the park would serve as a rare recognition that would inspire the nation. I'm saddened to hear that despite all the Black servicemen who died and the brave servicemen who stood strong and the inspirational hero who changed American history, my people, Black people, are not deemed worthy of a park name. I've read over the meeting transcripts about the naming of Concord Hills, and this park, which has national significance, is named based on the recommendations of staff members and 1,200 survey respondents in a region of over 2.5 million people. That survey is insufficient and too narrow in scope for an agency with your spending budget. I believe this has happened because the way in which we name our parks is outdated and broken. And that's because the process hasn't changed in over 100 years. This antiquated way of thinking leads to Black historical figures being placed in a survey category labeled simply as other. So now let's talk about and examine the others. Thurgood Marshall. His credentials are impeccable, and his story and achievements are tied to this land. He fought for the rights of both Black and Indigenous people, yet somehow he's not in serious consideration for this park name. Our Black history can only be told at this particular site, while Diablo Foothills, Bay Point, Antioch Oakley are available for naming and could tell the stories of the Chupcom peoples. Let me be clear, I am for naming a park to honor Native peoples. I'm saying it should not be at the expense of Black history. We can name Concord Hills to honor Black people. We can also name a park to honor Chupcom peoples. We don't have to choose. We should not be considered, it should not be considered a controversial or radical idea to name a park after a person who looks like me or my grandfather. This process has made me feel like our contributions to this region don't matter to you, but I know that's not the case. I've seen the great work you've done over the years. Sometimes we might forget to consider naming a park after a Black person because other parks in the districts around the nation are not doing it. But we are the Bay Area. We are innovators and leaders. We are home to some of the best and brightest in the country. We know it's not a radical or controversial idea to name a park after a person of color. Black communities have been paying property tax dollars to the park district for decades and have gone to the ballot box and voted for park funding. It only makes sense to maintain public trust and maintain the integrity of the national Black history that is now in your stewardship. There's a petition which has garnered over 270 signatures in just 5 days supporting naming Concord Hills, Thurgood Marshall Regional Park. But I'm not here to tell you what to name the park. I'm here to ask to conduct a new survey, a broader survey, one that's worthy of a park with national history, a survey that's created with the input of tribal leaders and Black leaders, one that is conducted throughout the East Bay in cities and neighborhoods with sizable minority populations, because I see this park naming as an opportunity in 2020 to finally represent our entire diverse population and honor heroes who otherwise would be lost in the sands of time. An opportunity beyond 2020 to bring my children, my Black and Indigenous children, to parks that represent their heritage. And when I say parks, that's plural, because representation matters. I just want to close on a personal note by saying, the reason why I'm sitting here today is because my grandparents migrated here to the East Bay from the rural South to serve this country during wartime. My grandfather fought for this country in the South Pacific, while my grandmother stayed and worked as a welder and riveter. I grew up hearing firsthand accounts of their people's unacknowledged contributions and sacrifices, including the events that took place at Port Chicago. Please respect their contributions to this region by naming Concord Hills to honor Black history, which is American history. It will make my grandparents proud. Thank you for listening, and thank you for all your work.
Thank you very much for your comments. Very much appreciated.
Our next public speaker is Deja Gold.
Horshatuli, everyone. My name is Deja Gould. I am the culture barrier and language keeper of the Confederated Villages of Lashawn. My comment today is in support of the naming of a traditional name, either for Chupcom territory or the traditional Baywalk naming for the place for our grandchildren. I want to thank Dawn for putting that together and working so hard in figuring out the right words and being patient and working with all of us as well as all the staff. I also wanted to talk a little bit about that place where the park will be. It's actually going to sit at the base of Mount Diablo, which is a sacred mountain to the people of the area, not only the Miwok people, but to the Chochenyo-speaking Ohlone people, and also many other tribes that would come there to pray at that mountain. The California Indian tribes of the area, including the Confederated Villages of Lashawn, are not a federally recognized tribe. That being said, is that we're basically told by the federal government that we do not exist. As well as many other tribes in the United States, we are told that there are too little of us, and we can't prove that there are enough of us to even exist as a tribe. We're the only people in the entire country that actually have to prove our blood lineage to be considered a people. So this park being named in a traditional Bay Miwok name, or even the name of the territory where the people who resided there and who still reside there on the land, would be beneficial to not only the people of the area, but to the now people who are residing there. This place is a historical place for us as well as Native people, because it is a traditional place of prayer. It is where the Chochenyo Ohlone people, it is our creation story. It is where we are thought to have became as a people. So that being said, there has also been comments about other buildings and other places on this park that will be able to be named. So as it's been explained here in different comments, this place holds a lot of history. So while I feel like the name should be traditional, as far as the park, I also feel like those other histories should also have a place there as well. So my personal opinion is that the park should be a traditional Native name, and that the other pieces there, especially the visiting center, should be named the Port Chicago Visiting Center. So I want to thank you all for allowing me to comment.
Thank you very much for your comments. Very much appreciated.
Our next public speaker is Victoria Adams. Victoria?
Can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you.
Good afternoon. My video needs to be started by, okay. Can you see me now?
Yes, we can. Hello.
Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for the opportunity to speak. Again, my name is Victoria Adams, and I'm president of the East County branch of the National Association for the Advancement of Colored People, the NAACP. And I'd like to say that while it's commendable, and I appreciate the Park District's recommendation and the fact that they have consulted with the indigenous Native people of the East Bay and their tribal leadership regarding the naming of this future park, the future naming of this park, the East County branch is hereby recommending or requesting that you postpone that naming, or that making that recommendation. And the reason is that we feel that it is imperative that you reach out and recommend and consult with other members of the community as you've sat down and consulted with these members of this indigenous tribe. It is important that you get that same type of feedback, that same type of feeling that you say that you have received from the members of the tribe that you have sat down and spoken with, and received that history and that the contributions that have been made. The impact on naming this park is very important to the African American community as well. The story has been told in the previous presentations about the Port Chicago 50 and their history and what led to that is something that you need to hear from other folks in the community and what that means to this community. As you know, at that point, at that time, there was over 390 people that were wounded, 300 and some odd people who were killed, and a town, an entire town that was devastated. And the area, surrounding areas that was devastated as well. And in addition to that, because of unsafe working conditions, these sailors who did not want to go back to that type of situation were then charged with mutiny and incarcerated unfairly. And there's a history there that we have to remember. And we have to remember that they stood up for their rights and changed the fabric of this community and what civil rights means. So the story, the legacy, this history, again, is part of that fabric and it deserves to be preserved. The landscape of this community was changed. And we understand that the Park District has many park sites where the Chupacabra territory and that they can take and they can rename and name. But this site, you cannot. There's no other place that you can name after what happened and that will represent the Port Chicago 50 in any manner. It is just this site. So with that being said, I encourage you, I implore you to not make that recommendation and to sit down with other community leaders and to make a determination of what would be the best name for this site. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your comments. And thank you for being with us today. Appreciate it.
Okay, I believe that's all the people that have identified they wanted to speak. If there's anyone else out there who's interested in making a public comment on this matter, can you please unmute yourself and state your name?
Is there anybody else out there?
Don't see anyone. I see Kelly, but there's no audio. Okay.
Any other public comments from anyone? And there's nobody else in the room.
No, not that I can see. We do have 2 written public comments. Would you like me to read those comments now?
Yes, please.
Okay, the first comment is submitted from Alexander Wills. He supports naming the new park in Concord, Thurgood Marshall Regional Park. He feels that it's important to him, his family, and his friends. Okay. The next public comment was submitted by John Lawrence. It's a fairly lengthy letter, which I will read. I had intended to send comments on the renaming of the Concord Hills Regional Park earlier, but a slower than expected recovery from recent surgery precluded me from doing so. I am hopeful these comments will be incorporated into the formal hearing record and presented to each board member for consideration. I strongly endorse replacing the Concord Hills Regional Park name with Port Chicago Regional Park. As a longtime assistant to Congressman George Miller and his staff director on the House Committee on Natural Resources during the passage of legislation creating the Port Chicago National Memorial, my engagement in the public lands issues in the East Bay go back nearly half a century. As a historian and now a visiting professor at the University of California, Washington Center, I have a long-standing interest in African-American history, including the events surrounding the Port Chicago disaster and its aftermath. Combining these two areas of expertise, I deeply appreciate the essential role that naming of the key resources and place can have in expanding public knowledge and in understanding of seminal events and individuals whose significance may be diminished by oversight. The naming of this new feature of the East Bay Regional Parks system offers a very significant opportunity to continue to highlight the long ignored impact of Port Chicago in the history of the nation's race relations, the military and efforts to achieve a more equitable and integrated society. So naming this land would directly enhance public awareness of the unique role this very site played in moving our country in such a direction. My recommendation is based on the recognition that the land under discussion served for decades as a part of the Port Chicago Naval Magazine and its successor, the Concord Naval Weapons Station. As such, there is a direct linkage to that earlier history. Conversation from military use to recreation and resources management would also exemplify a transition of land use that dramatically reflects the values of Bay Area residents. My recommendation is not intended in any way the connections, is not intended to minimize in any way the connections of others, including Native Americans, to this region. Certainly the contributions of all those who lived and work in this area can and should be reflected in the exhibitions that will be incorporated into the visitor centers that will serve as a gateway for the park. But there is no other property where the connection to Port Chicago and the unique experience of African Americans in the military is more exemplified than in this particular tract, an observation that should influence the decision concerning the naming of the park. While there is already a national memorial, as noted, visiting the site remains problematic, and a park designation will greatly expand public familiarity with the historic events and their significance. Lastly, some may raise concerns that naming this local park land the Port Chicago Regional Park would create confusion with the nearby, although difficult to visit at present, National Memorial. I see no conflict. I believe the two enhance each other and amplify the importance accorded the events and people of Port Chicago to the benefit of better appreciating the historic significance of the role the disaster played in local and national history. Nor is it unique for local, state, and federal historic/public land designations to be adjacent or even overlapping, since multiple jurisdictions recognize the significance of such sites. I regret being unable to attend the board meeting today, but I am hopeful that these comments, supplemented with additional information from others providing testimony, will assist board members in their decision concerning the renaming of the Concord Hills Regional Park. Please feel free to contact me with any further questions. I appreciate being given the opportunity to offer these comments. John Lawrence. And that's all the written public comments I have at this time, President Corbett.
Thank you very much, Becky. Appreciate that. And my first comments will be, I'm so appreciative of the public comments today, to all of you who have taken the time to be with us and express your heartfelt thoughts and concerns. And I think one of the most important themes we've heard today is to protect and preserve history and to tell stories that should be told. And I think this site is a very interesting site for the fact that there are many stories associated with this land, and some of which were intentionally erased over time. And I think that's why this discussion is so important, and why the decision when we make it is so important in making sure that we are so inclusive of the history of this site. So I have to say, it is very difficult to hear from various groups of people who have said their history has been forgotten, because that's just not right. And as a park district, we do many things, but one of the things that is also part of our role is our and our interpretive histories, our protection of history, and our opportunity to continue to tell the stories of our history in our communities. And we do lots of things, but that's a really important part of it too. So I'm very touched by all of the comments that have been made today. And it's no doubt that this is a very difficult decision, but at the very least, we should make sure that we continue to have a very open process and listen to all voices on this. But it is indeed quite difficult. I want to open it up to the other board members, but I do have one really important question that I'd like to have answered, if we can answer it, because it's really important to put this in the context of this process that we've been having for naming. And that is, and I'm sorry, I don't mean to put someone on the spot, but one thing we have heard throughout is that it would be confusing to name the park Port Chicago because of the national monument that already exists. And if staff could maybe come on and help answer. I don't know if Tom wants to weigh in. I don't know if the GM wants to weigh in, but that is a context and a part of this discussion we've been having when we've been trying to determine the naming of this park. I mean, you can hear board members say, but we've been told this would be confusing. Not that that dictates a final decision, but that has been something that has been emphasized. So I think it's really important to put that out on the table and answer that question and deal with that as we, have our discussion about the naming. Yes, Mr. GM, sorry to put you on the spot, but thank you.
That's what I'm here for. Thank you very much. And I just want to acknowledge the tremendous speakers today. It is an honor to work for this district and for the public when we hear what we heard today. We talk about civil discussion and democracy. We are hearing that today. The staff will completely allow, of course, the board to deliberate on the direction they want to go. But I wanted to give a little bit of history. So we are very proud, as the National Park is proud, that the legislation on the Port Chicago Memorial was the first piece of legislation signed by President Obama, the first African-American president of the United States of America. I hold that legislation on my wall framed. I'm so proud of that. I think we do have to recognize that it was the district that made the application for the transfer of this land as a regional park, not the National Park Service, and that the memorial existed before, long before we proposed this as a new regional park. The legislation was very specific that the East Bay Regional Park District and the National Park Service should partner on the visitor center. I'm not making any comment as to what should be named or how, but I think that was a very specific piece of the legislation, a partnership between the national park and between the park district, because very specifically, the ongoing limitation of bringing the story of Port Chicago and the memorial to the public with extremely difficult restricted access. So that was something that both the national parks and the regional park district worked very hard. And we worked very hard with then Congressman Miller to make that happen and get that signed into law. That's just context. I do, in just listening today, it is just no question that this site and the story of Port Chicago is not a Contra Costa story. It is a national story. And so much came about with the struggle of people of color, of African Americans, of our Black citizens and sailors to get justice. And so it is the issue of justice, and the issue of that history is very important, and that story needs to be front and center. We also heard today that the indigenous people, the first people of our county, and I have known the story of the creation of those people from Mount Diablo since I was a little kid. And that is a very important piece of the indigenous people's history here. And this is in the shadow of Mount Diablo. Mount Diablo Creek runs through it. So I think that it is a challenge to have the Port Chicago Memorial, National Memorial, and a Port Chicago name for the regional park. I think that is a challenge. But I think we have very, very dedicated, smart, and wonderful people who could work together to figure out the right course of action to honor both of the issues that were raised today. And it is, I think, probably one of the most important decisions in the Park District's history. And we need to take our time and we need to involve, I agree with some of the speakers, we need to involve more people, broader people. Staff has done a great job, but this is so important. I don't know anywhere in the district where we've had an issue that's of a national scale in our system as naming a park or a site or that history. So I really think we have to figure out a path that respects both of the goals today, and we are not in a hurry. I really do think that this requires more deliberation and a broader discussion. And I think we can come up with a wonderful opportunity here that respects both and the importance of both of these discussions we've had today, of these, what I will call respecting, or I should say re-respecting where respect did not exist. And I think that that's really an important thing we can and should work on. So I think, I don't think the staff is ready to say that one of the considerations should be naming the whole park a regional park, not a national park, the Port Chicago Regional Park. But I do think we have to have a way to take the input we had today and really work through it and engage people even more to come up with doing both. And I think we can.
Thank you, Mr. General Manager. And I just want to ask the question again. We've been told that it would be very difficult and very confusing to name the park in memory of Port Chicago because there's already a federal monument. You know, we've heard that over and over. So is that an issue or not?
I do believe it's a concern of the Park District, who worked so hard to get this property preserved, because it will be seen as a part of the national monument, the memorial. And I think we have to figure that path forward. The National Park did not take this property. They gave it to us through the beneficial conveyance, but it was always seen as a regional park. It is not the place name of Port Chicago at all. It's a place where we can tell the story and honor that history. And I think we have to have a better way of doing that, as we heard today. But that would be the concern that I think the staff would have, that you really are expanding the national park, not a regional park, by having the same name, whether it's memorial or park. I think I think that's a challenge. And again, I go back to the nationally approved legislation to recognize the Port Chicago Memorial as a park, and that there should be a joint visitor center. And I think that's something that we have to figure out how to do both. But again, you've got a very spiritually sacred, significant story of our Native people, which hasn't been told enough and hasn't been respected enough. But you also have a national story of discrimination and of an opportunity that to make Black lives really matter right here in this story. And I think we just need to take more time to figure out how to do that and work with everybody.
Thank you very much. I think the most significant thing for us to deal with in listening to the conversation today, and many conversations that have occurred long before today's discussion, is to understand the deep importance our decision making will have on continuing to tell important histories that have, you know, for all the wrong reasons been, I wouldn't say forgotten, because they haven't been forgotten. People hold these histories in their hearts even when others do not recognize them. But you know, I want to just say something personally about myself with regard to the stories of our Indigenous people, and also, you know, my own understanding and knowledge of Port Chicago, and why I see this as so difficult. And I'll be fairly brief. I could talk for hours about this, but I'll just give some snippets. You know, I grew up in the East Bay. You know, and so did members of my family. And in any of the history that I learned growing up, during the time I was going to school, high school, and even you know, elementary school, we really didn't touch on the deep history of the Indigenous peoples who lived on the lands that we lived on, that were here long before us, taking care of the land and being stewards of the land. And so, you know, I feel very deeply when I hear a story where people are just asking that they be recognized in our consideration when we're naming lands, and to even use the language and the dialect of people who came before us, so it will not be forgotten. I mean, it hits me deeply that people's history has been lost because people didn't care to recognize it. So there's that. But also, in addition, and just as equally as important, is the story of Port Chicago. Once again, I grew up in the East Bay. I did not know about the history of Port Chicago until much later in my life. Those stories were never told when I was learning history growing up. And I'm from here. And, you know, I learned more about it because of the amazing advocacy of Mark Desagne, who I served with in the legislature, who always told the story and reminded us every year on the anniversary of the terrible disaster. And so I learned about that. And then I learned much later than that about Thurgood Marshall's representation of the sailors. And I just feel robbed that I was never taught this history growing up. It's just not right that people have, you know, tried not to tell stories that are extremely important for us to learn from. So for me, it's quite difficult because we have important stories to continue to tell about this land. And I don't want us to lose sight of that. This is a very significant decision. So I will ask if other board members would like to weigh in on this so we can have a discussion and determine where we go from here. So who would like to speak first? Director Rosario?
I just want to second President Corbett's sentiments. This is a very, very difficult situation, or difficult task that in front of us. And it's not unlike, it's not like a coin with two sides. It's more like a die with a story for each side. So there's like 8 stories. And we're here to try and capture the history of our Native Indigenous people, who were not only the original people here, but also enslaved by the missionaries, and then driven to near extinction by the advocacy of the governor in the 1850s to kill all Native Americans. And it's a testament to their resiliency that there are survivors. And then with the Black Americans in Port Chicago, such obvious discrimination. The deaths, the total of deaths for the Black American sailors, and then the audacity of the authorities to condemn and convict the 50 sailors who refused to go back to work when the white officers in that same charge were given time off, didn't have to go back to work. And so those stories we need to try and capture. It's not easy, but I think deliberation is very, very important. And I really thank staff for their deep dive. We may need to, and I take the general manager at his word. I think we may have some more time to deliberate and get more of the full story. But in my look, I didn't sleep at all last night thinking about this, because this is a tremendous burden and responsibility, and I really like that we honor the Native Americans with the Chippewa territory, but I also really like the Chachan Anaksan saying. But I also, I believe I recalled in our first session that I had called out that Thurgood Marshall should be honored as well. So my initial thinking on this, after hearing everyone's testimony, of course, is that we either have some kind of a hybrid name as recommended by Diana McDaniel, or I am in preference to the Chippewa territory with the Chachao Anaksan as a subset. And then I would like to propose that we name the visitor center for Thurgood Marshall. And that's my kind of my initial thoughts. But again, I'm only one board member. And there's several more. So those are my initial thoughts. And I think I think there's lots of ways to come out with a name that represents both. So. If I have something else later, I'll pipe up. But those are my thoughts right now.
Thank you, Director. Thank you very much, Director Rosario. Director Wieskamp?
What a difficult day this is turning out to be. Many people with good intentions and thoughtful ones. I had a sister, Linnell, who taught 2 Indian reservations, Pine Ridge and Chilpin. And I really appreciated the fact of how hard the lives were for those Indigenous people. And they probably still are, as far as I know from what I read. I certainly, growing up in Texas, I guarantee you, I never heard about Port Chicago. Nothing in the history. And I took a lot of history classes. So this has been a learning experience too. And certainly those very brave sailors deserve recognition. I'm going to just insert this because I want those listening to realize that we do honor Black Americans. The Dodson Family March, name for the Dotson family, that are a Black family. Whitney was one of our board members who fought for a very long time to have that as open space for the public. And therefore it is the Dotson family marsh. We all respected Whitney so much and his whole family and how tough they were. And they never gave up on that name. I was really touched today, and I hope I have her name correctly, by Lisa Gold, the People of the Sun. I know nothing about that. The fact that they're an unnamed tribe as far as the federal government goes. That must be so hard to know what you are, and you can't get the feds to pay attention. So more power to them. I don't know what the right name is. I think board members know how much I appreciate art. And by God, I just picture some artist coming up with something with 50 sailors marching down through that land that we own. I don't know. Something to honor both. It's very hard to split babies. Remember that? There's an old story. And I don't know how to do this, but I think we respect the public. If there's more input, come up with a great name, I think we'll do it. If we need to go ahead and there's nothing to stop us from naming the visitor center. But I think we ought to give due consideration to this in all people, whatever their color. Because we all live here and we care about it. I wish I had a magic answer for D on what the right name is. I don't, but I think it will be given due consideration. I think we had 3 surveys, correct? Our agency and others, I think, did surveys, and we had more time, but there is no rush in my mind to finishing this. I would like us to sort of be very thoughtful about it, hear from the other board members and others who are interested. We're lucky to have the land. People are lucky to have the land. And we have time to work on it. So I appreciate all the board members, all who have testified. And I appreciate specifically, I think her name was Lisa Gold, for the People of the Sun. I don't know if there's any way we can help them, but they deserve to be recognized too.
Yeah.
That's
Deja Gold.
Lisa Gold. Okay, Lisa, thank you very much.
Deja.
I really appreciate it.
Thank you, Director Wieskamp.
Where do we go from here?
So much to think about it. And I will just echo my fellow board members in appreciation for the words we heard today. This is an amazing time where it's so important for not only, I don't even know how to start this. It is time. It's not that there hasn't been time over history where people have a voice and who have spoken and who have made change through their thoughts and their actions and their words. But it's such an important time, and that everyone listen and that everyone share their voice. And there's been so much of that happening. People out exercising their free speech rights, speaking up and speaking out in unprecedented numbers and ways, even beyond my memories of a younger time during the 60s. And it is amazing and remarkable time in our history. And it's an awesome time in our history. And it, honestly, it feels great that there is so much public discussion and reflection on our histories. And that's, I think, why this is so touching for all of us, because, we want to make the right decision in recognition of the history of everyone who has touched this place. And I've heard very clearly, this is a place of local significance, as a land creation for peoples who came long before us, and also a very significant place of national history and Black history, in the sacrifice of the many sailors who lost their lives at the explosion while they were in service of their country, and also the history of, I still shake my head, I just can't even believe that they were court-martialed, those that stood up afterwards to let people know that this was just wrong. And then the impacts of all generations of the Indigenous people and of Black Americans because of how people have been treated over time. So, you know, I am almost without words. I do want to touch just a little further. We've had a significant discussion and also unprecedented discussion with Indigenous people and leaders that we haven't had in the past. And I want to recognize and honor that. The staff time that organized that, but also all of the individuals who became part of this conversation. We cannot forget that either. That's quite significant. And also, of course, I want to recognize all those advocates for many years, and some of you who are at this meeting and on this Zoom, who have been telling the story and retelling the story of the history of Port Chicago, so it won't be forgotten, and to you know, ensure that people understand the significance of those historic events from the past and towards our future. So I think that I am not critical of the fact that our staff has spent significant time in going out to the public, doing surveys, attending public meetings, and trying to draw in information to get public input on the names, on a name for this site. But I also want to state that I think it is very, very important for us to take a pause at this moment and find additional ways to ensure that we have had as full of a discussion as we need to hear from people on their thoughts and interests in the naming of the land. And we have, you know, heard very much of that today, but I think that taking some time to hear more and have conversations so that we can make this very, very important decision, because it is significant. I know, I don't think there's been any major naming since I've been on the board in the last 4 years. And I've heard from my board members that it's always a bit of a difficult process. But I think that this is not necessarily a difficult process, but a recognition of the significance of the histories of this land. Not to say that other parcels of land aren't important, but clearly there is a deep, deep and important history of this land. So I would like to suggest to my board members, and I think I've heard it from them, that we take more time to hear more, to heed the words of the individuals who have spoken to us today, and also not forget the work that has been done and the investment in the sharing of stories of those that have been involved in this process as well, and determine how we can meld that together and come up with the best decision for the naming of this land. I think we know two things. One, obviously, the significance of the history of the Chukon people should not be forgotten in this decision-making process. And of course, also, we should absolutely not forget the history of this site and the sacrifice of those who died at Port Chicago, and the fights and the struggles and the history and the change that their lives made to civil rights. And so with that, I would recommend that we send this back to staff for a very thorough conversation based on what we've heard today to determine how we receive more input and have an opportunity to come up with the right decision. It's not a decision that should be rushed. And I've heard from staff and board members that there isn't a rush. We also have this significant opportunity. I'll say this one last thing. Base reuse was a federal policy adopted a number of years ago to turn military bases and other facilities back over to the people of the communities so that there would be a place to allow for either development or the creation of open space where all in communities could share in these beautiful lands that at one time were used for wartime and now would be places more of peace. So in recognition of that, that also makes our decision quite significant in the naming of these 2,500 acres of land that are now being turned back over to the people. So with that, I think I did see Brian Holt a moment ago. Brian, thank you, and Devin and Christina and all those who have spent so much time following the direction of the board, I might add. We have asked you to put together the information that you shared with us. I think we're asking you one more time to take a longer and deeper look and try to help us and guide us as we make a public decision in the best interest of our communities that we represent.
Thank you, President Corbett, and thank you to all the speakers who came. This was really, I think, a great conversation and an important conversation. So I really appreciate the thoughtfulness of everybody participating in this. We're totally fine to continue to do this work. We actually have been working with Donna Graves, who's a public historian, who has been a part of the land use plan process from the beginning. So she's under contract. She's worked with National Park Service around the Rosie the Riveter site and other areas. So so we'll continue to work with her on this. And I think, yeah, we welcome further conversation.
All right, thank you very much. I know that today what was on the agenda was the naming of the park land. I know in the future we will also have additional opportunities to name significant portions of property and sites within the 2,500 or so acres, including the visitor center, which I envision as a very important place that tells all the stories of the land. So do we know timeline-wise, what sort of timelines we have facing us with regard to namings and future namings?
No, I don't think we have a current timeline. I think a lot of this depends, and I'll just for the sake of mentioning, we did adopt the land use plan, as you all aware, that is currently being litigated by a neighboring landowner. So that delays us in terms of being able to move forward and implement the plan. So of course, the thought was that we would be looking towards naming some of these facilities as we actually move forward with implementation. So so we have to work through that hurdle as well. And of course, before the visitor center before we can pursue developing that visitor center. Of course, we can pursue planning and design with National Park Service on that, but so that was, the initial thought is as we get closer to implementation that there would be some opportunity to name, but that of course is all up to the board and the board's discretion. So decision. So we stand by to do what needs to be done.
Okay, thank you so very much, Brian. Does anyone else on the board have any comments they would like to make? Anyone else from staff have any comments before we close this item and give our direction for the board, from the committee to staff to continue to look at this really important naming? Everybody good? Okay. Thank you all very much. Everyone who has attended today's meeting, we sincerely appreciate your input. All right. Thank you. I have been told that we do have an additional public comment, not on the agenda, but a public comment, and I would like to ask Becky to open the room so we may have that comment.
Yes, we have Kelly Abreu.
Thank you very much.
Hi. A quick note on public communications. If you go to your website, the official website of the Park District, and look at the page for Mission Peak, you'll find 4 separate mentions in the text. In capital letters, it says Park Open 4 separate times. And then once at the top of the page, it says Park Closed. And it seems like when I mentioned this to the staff a day or two ago, nothing happened. I didn't get any response. I didn't get, there was no acknowledgement that your website is confusing, contradictory, and does not convey a clear and consistent message to the public. So I really suggest that you just take a look at that webpage and try to make it say one thing, Park Closed. Also on finance, here we are in September. If you look at your last comprehensive annual financial report, you'll see that the forecast, and I know you've been repeatedly saying how proud and appreciative you are of the financial reports you're getting and how well informed you are. Well, last year, about 13 months ago in August, you did get a revised forecast from your economic consultants for the property tax forecast for the next 4 or 5 years. And here we are in September of 2020. We should have had that forecast by now. And for us to wait until the end of this month, about 27 more days, you're asking for a lot. And every day that passes without that input you need to have that input. You need to start making those decisions. You need to look at those numbers, and you need to keep abreast of those things. That's the board's job. And finally, when it comes on that naming issue, I was at a loss. And the loss I felt, I don't have any opinions on naming, but I felt a loss because I said immediately, it occurred to me, we need they should be talking to Whitney Dodson, or Director Dodson would know would know how to navigate this. This is very complicated, and he would have a lot of good guidance to give on this. And I feel that loss, and I think that you're going to have you should be trying to make up for that loss, reaching out and ask yourself what would he be saying on this situation. Thank you.
Thank you, Kelly. I'm just going to say one quick thing. These are unprecedented times at the Park District as well. All of our staff is working at maximum capacity, not only because of the challenges of COVID-19, but because we have been involved in several levels on fighting fires, and keeping staff safe and keeping the community safe. And I have nothing to say to indicate that all of our staff are not putting 1,000% into the work in their jobs at this time. And so any criticism that might indicate that people are not doing their jobs is something I can't agree with at the moment. But I always do appreciate your comments, Kelly. But people are, you know, really, really engaged at this time, working very hard. Thank you. It's not every day you've got 5 parks on fire. Thank you. Director Wieskamp?
It just happens that I'm not on the finance committee, but excuse me, Chief Finance Officer Deborah Hawker recently mentioned that at this moment, checking in on sources, it seems like our property tax estimate is holding for next year.
Yes.
So yeah, our staff is keeping track as best they can where they can gather real information. And yes, we owe a lot, as do a lot of private citizens, to our fire department, who helped a number of people outside the fire department and adjacent ranchers and so on. So our staff is doing a great job. It's just tough times everywhere.
Yeah. And all of the financial information is being made available. Some financial information is not coming in or being provided because of challenges with regard to the changing landscape because of how COVID-19 does impact all forms of revenue to the district and property taxes and et cetera. So we are on top of it, but we're not getting information at the same speed as we may have in the past. So please be patient with us, Kelly. And again, thank you for your comments. I know you love our parks. Thank you. Any other comments from anyone?
We have no additional public comments at this time.
Okay, thank you very much. And again, one more time, thank you to everybody who has been on the call today. And we will take your thoughts and comments to the next step and the next level as we move forward on this process. Thank you all very much. And board comments, any additional board comments before we adjourn?
Have a safe, cool Labor Day. Be careful.
Yes, I agree with that. Ditto. And does the general manager have any closing comments? All right, I don't see him appearing. Okay, and Dee, you're good? Director Rosario? Okay. All right, everybody, thank you so much. This meeting is adjourned. We'll see you later. Be safe and be well.
Thank you.